Resourceful Designer, episode 256, Getting Delinquent Clients to Pay.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. His first language was French, but he's lost a lot of it over the years. Marc Descotes.
Bonjour, je suis très content que tu prends un peu de ta journée pour passer avec moi. Translation, I'm glad you decided to spend a little bit of your day listening to me. Now in this week's episode, I'm going to share strategies for collecting from clients who are past due on their payments. And if you stick around after that conversation, I'll share a great tip where I'm going to tell you about something you can do that takes less than a minute and can save you some server space and possibly speed up your WordPress websites, all without installing a plugin. So I'll share that at the end of the episode. But now, getting delinquent clients to pay. The life of a home-based designer, a freelancer, is a precarious one. You spend a lot of time learning this craft that we call design. Whether you went to school or you learned on your own, you invested a lot of time in yourself to get to where you are today. Now, clients hire you to design wonderful and functional things for them. You spend hours, if not days, working on and perfecting each project until you and the client are satisfied. Well, after doing all of that, you expect to be compensated accordingly. So you send your invoice to the client, feeling good about your accomplishment. And then you wait, and wait, and wait some more. But no payment is forthcoming. Has the client stiffed you? Have they simply forgotten to send your payment? Are they purposely delaying things? Did they even get your invoice to begin with? These are all the things that go through your mind when a client fails to pay your invoice within an expected time frame. Now, luckily, this is the exception to the norm. I would say, 99% of clients you work with will pay you. But it's almost inevitable that at some point in your design career, you will have to deal with a delinquent client. In the 16 years that I've been running my design business, I've only had 3 clients that I was never able to collect from. The first was a local embroidery shop. It was probably my first or second year of business. And the owner of the embroidery shop hired me to vectorize images for him so that he could then import them into his embroidery machine. We had an agreement where he would send me images to be vectorized, and I would just keep a tally of how many images I did and invoice him at the end of each month. Let me tell you, this was a pretty easy gig, and it paid very well. Then, one month, the owner called me up to see if I had received the $300 check that he had mailed me. I told him that I had just received it that day, but I hadn't gotten to the bank yet to deposit it. And he asked me if I could hold off until the following week. He said there had been some sort of mix-up at the bank and the funds weren't in the account. Can I wait till the following week before depositing the check? This was a good client. I'd been dealing with him for a few months now, so I thought nothing of it. Well, the following week, I decided to give him a call to see if it was okay for me to bring the check to the bank. And he informed me that he had actually declared bankruptcy just a couple of days prior, and that the check that he had mailed me was no longer any good. And he told me that he would not be paying my last invoice. What can I do? He had declared bankruptcy, and I was out $300. Now, the maddening thing about this client is, no more than 2 weeks later, he actually reopened his business. And when I heard that he was open again, I went to see him hoping that, he's open again, I'll get paid. And he told me, nope, I'm not paying you. What he did is he actually opened up a brand new business, but he was working under a DBA, which is doing business as the old business name. So officially, it was a newly registered business under a new business name, but he was doing business as his old business name. So to the general public, all it looked like was he might have taken a 2-week vacation and then he was back working again. But to all his creditors, the business that owed them money no longer existed. So I and whoever else he owed money to were out whatever that amount was. Now, the funny thing is the guy actually had the nerve to ask me if I was interested in continuing our previous arrangement with his now new business. Well, I told him what he can do with that arrangement, and that's all I'm going to say on that. Now, the second client that I never collected from is really a mystery. The guy was a chef who owned a small local restaurant. And he told me that a couple of years prior, his 10-year-old son had died. I don't remember now. This was back in 2006, 2007, somewhere around there. And he wanted me to take a photo of his son, or actually the head from his son's photo, and Photoshop it onto the body of a young boy that was dressed in a chef's outfit. He wanted to put this frame on the wall. His son loved him and looked up to him very much, and he thought it would be really good to have a frame picture of his son dressed in a chef's outfit. So I agreed to do this. We agreed to a price of $100, and I did it. I emailed him a digital file, and a few days later, he told me to drop by the restaurant anytime, and he would just write me a check on the spot. A few days later, I went by the restaurant, but it was closed. I tried again a couple of days later and it was still closed. And I actually tried this for a few times over the next couple of months. Every time I went by, the restaurant was closed and he was no longer answering his phone. Then one day, as I was driving by, I noticed that the lights were on in the restaurant. So I went and I knocked on the door. A woman answered and told me that the chef was actually her brother and that he had disappeared a few weeks prior. Nobody had seen him since. In fact, his wallet and his keys were found inside his apartment, and that the police were investigating his disappearance. Now, when I was talking to the woman, I actually saw the framed photo of the chef's son was on the wall where he said he was going to put it. Now, of course, there was no way I was going to ask his sister to pay the bill, so I just let that one go. And to this day, I have no idea whatever happened to him. But the restaurant never reopened, and I never saw my money. Now, the third delinquent client that I ever had was the owner of a paintball field not too far from here. It's a place that my son used to go play when he was a teenager. One day, while my son was playing, I was sitting there talking to the owner, and in passing, I mentioned that I was a graphic and web designer. And he asked me if I would be willing to have a look and offer suggestions for his old and outdated website. So I took a look, and the following weekend when my son went back and I drove him, I talked to the owner and I said that his best option would be a brand new website and I could build one for $600. Now, this was back around 2007 when I was charging ridiculously low prices for websites, and he agreed to the price. So I got to work. The person who had handled the website for him before no longer wanted to have anything to do with him, which probably was a warning sign, but I didn't realize it at the time. But I managed to transfer his domain name to my care, and I made a copy of the old website from whatever server it was on and moved it to my server. And then a couple of weeks later, I replaced it with a brand new website. And when I showed the client, he loved it. But when it came time to pay, he kept trying to delay things. He would give me one excuse and then another on why he couldn't pay me at that point. Well, this went on for a couple of weeks and then months. And finally, and I didn't know any better at this point, but finally, I just decided, I said, listen, I'm taking your website down. Whenever you pay me, I'll put the website back up. So I did, and I kept asking for payment, but it never came. I even threatened legal action if he didn't pay. And he called my bluff. He told me, he says, go ahead, take me to court. So when I contacted my accountant for something and I told him about the situation, he told me that for $600, it wasn't really worth going to court for, not even small claims court. I was better off to just write it off as a loss. Now, the funny thing is one day, one of my son's friends was over at the house here, and I overheard him say something about the paintball field's new website. Well, it turns out that this guy that owed me money, he ended up getting one of the teenage customers of his to build him a brand new website under a completely different domain name. And he did it in exchange for free time on the paintball field. And it turns out that's why he didn't pay me. But the stupid thing is instead of paying me, he was willing to give up the exact match domain name, the .com name. So I had his business name. I had his business name .com was in my control. Well, he was willing to give that up for a completely different domain name and build a new website on. And the thing is the domain name that I had, his exact match domain name, was something that he had had for several years already and was on all his marketing material. He had stickers that he handed out with that on it. He had his brochures. He had all the signage around the paintball field, as well as advertising around town. Not to mention the yellow pages. Back then, people had yellow page ads. He had his website listed in the yellow pages. Well, now all his marketing stuff was pointing to a domain name that no longer had a website, and he had a different website that people can go to. So he decided that $600 wasn't worth it, and I don't even know what happened. Shortly after that, my son stopped playing paintball, so we never went back, and I never saw the guy again. Now, I can tell you that this third one, the paintball field, that was the client that finally convinced me to start using a contract for design projects. Prior to that, I had heard about designers using contracts, but I thought, I don't need contracts. My clients are great. I don't need it. I'm getting paid. But after that one there, that's when I decided that, no, maybe this contract thing has something to it. And now I don't do any design project without a contract. So I do have him to thank for that. Now, the point of me telling you these three stories is to say that there are clients out there who, for one reason or another, won't pay their bills. I was lucky that the money that I lost from these three combined clients totaled $1,000. And all three of these situations happened within the first 2, maybe 3 years of my business. They taught me a valuable lesson, and I'm happy to say that since then, I've never failed to collect on an invoice. But that doesn't mean that I haven't spent some time chasing down payments over the years. Now, I hope that you're never in that situation, but in case you are, I want to share ways that you can get delinquent clients to pay. Now, I want to emphasize something, and that is that different clients, especially larger ones, do sometimes have their own internal payment policies. This doesn't mean that they're not paying you. It's just that they have a longer than normal payment window that they work in. I know when I used to do work for the local shopping mall, they were one of my great clients for many years. Well, I quickly learned that when I sent them an invoice, I wouldn't be paid for at least 90 days. That's just the way they worked. I would send the invoice to the local mall, and at the end of the month, she would send the invoice to their head office, and that would probably last a month there, and then it would be sent off to whoever paid the invoice, and who knows, it might take another month before the check was finally issued and mailed to me. So it was nothing for me to wait 90 days for a payment for the invoice anytime I sent it to the shopping mall. And I just learned over time to live with that. My local municipal government here, anytime I do a job for them, I know that they have a 60-day payment window. They're going to pay within 60 days. Doesn't matter if I have a 15 or whatever on my invoice, it'll take them up to 60 days to pay. Now, some companies have a payment policy where they send out payment at the end of the month. So if you send them an invoice on the 25th of the month, you'll get your payment in 5 or 6 days. But if you send an invoice to them on the 1st of the month, you can expect to wait the full month before you receive your payment. Now, none of these situations are delinquent clients. They're just clients with longer than normal payment policies that you'll just have to learn to live with. But what if their payment policy is not the issue? What if the client is just not paying at all? Well, my first bit of advice to you is don't get into these situations. Protect yourself in advance. The best way to deal with delinquent clients is not to have delinquent clients to begin with. Lay out some groundwork to protect yourself from these situations. Make sure that you have a contract for every project and get the client to sign it. Make sure your client understands your payment schedule, or better yet, if you can, get payment up front. And make it easy for clients to pay you by using an online payment portal. I can tell you that one of the best things I did was start accepting online payments. No longer did I have to wait for checks to arrive 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks down the road. Some clients would pay within minutes of receiving the invoice once I allowed online payments. So the best thing to do is protect yourself by never getting into the situation where a client owes you money because you've given them the opportunity to either pay you in advance or pay you right then when they get the invoice. But if you are in a situation where you're not receiving payment, I have some things I want you to think of. 1, don't assume anything. When a payment doesn't arrive as expected, it's really easy to jump to the conclusion that the client is somehow delaying payment for some reason. But until you know the actual situation, don't assume anything. Just because you sent an invoice doesn't actually mean that the client received it. Even billing software, the type that tracks when a client opens an invoice, sometimes registers a false positive. Or it's possible the client did receive it, but for some reason didn't see it. Haven't you ever clicked on an email, realized, oh, this isn't the email I'm looking for, so you click on to another one without even giving the first one any thought? Well, maybe that happened to the invoice. And then the client just never bothered looking at it again because it was marked as read. So before jumping to conclusions, I recommend you send a reminder message. Send something just saying, hey, I just wanted to make sure that you received the invoice. I know from experience that oftentimes that reminder message was met with a payment within minutes of me sending it. Sometimes the client is embarrassed. They missed the invoice, or they saw it and they completely forgot about it for some reason. And that reminder was all it needed for them to finally make the payment. Now, if you've emailed the client and you haven't heard anything back, try picking up the phone and calling them. Don't feel bad about checking up on past due invoices. You never know. Maybe the person that you sent the invoice to is on vacation, or maybe they're on maternity leave and they didn't set up an out-of-office response. Or maybe the contact that you had at that company is no longer there. They've left and maybe nobody is checking their email, or their emails are only checked periodically from that point. So when you're not hearing anything back, call the company up. Now, a trick I suggest is anytime you call a company about a past due invoice, always ask to speak to somebody in accounts payable. When you ask for this, it gets right to the point and it puts you in contact with the person in charge of sending out the payments. Now, sometimes if it's a sole proprietor, that's the business owner. But in other cases, it'll put you through to the department that's in charge. And if you tell them there's an outstanding invoice, they will get to the bottom of it. So be understanding, but firm when you do explain the situation, and hopefully it can be handled right then and there. But what if things aren't going well at this point? Well, at that point, you have to decide, is it worth pursuing? You're at the point in the process where you need to ask yourself if going after this money is actually worth the hassle. Yes, what you do is valuable, and you do deserve to be compensated for the work you do. However, sometimes you can actually end up spending more time chasing the money than it's actually worth. That's what happened to me in that paintball thing. My accountant told me that $600 just wasn't worth pursuing. If the client wasn't going to pay, and after everything I did, the client said, go ahead, take me to court, said it just wasn't worth it, just let it go. So figure out if the amount owed to you is worth pursuing. Now, if it is, and you're getting a chance to talk to the client, and maybe they're hesitant, or they straight out tell you that they're not able to pay, well, before getting angry or threatening them with anything, perhaps you can offer them a payment plan. Any client who wants to maintain a good relationship with you might agree to an option of a payment plan. This is a great way to actually build client loyalty. You don't know what their situation is, and offering them to pay in installments might be the olive branch that they need, and they'll remember you for your understanding once they're back on their feet. So help them out and offer them to pay in installments. Now, depending on the situation, you may also want to offer a discount. If it sounds like the client is hesitant or saying that they might not be able to pay, you may want to offer them a deal if they pay their invoice, say, immediately or within the next couple of days, or if you pay this week. Offering a limited time discount may entice a strapped for cash client to pay the bill now in order to save money in the long run. In some cases, it's actually better to lose a little bit of what's owed to you now than risk losing all of it should the client not pay at all. Now, when all else fails, your last resort should be to seek legal action. Now, let me emphasize, seeking a legal solution should only be used when nothing else has worked. Even offering a discount is preferable than taking a client to court. In fact, I suggest that before you start any sort of legal action, you actually send a warning letter to the client, warning them that you are going to take legal action. This will inform the client that you plan on seeking legal action without actually starting anything. Give them a deadline in your letter to submit payment, and if it isn't met, follow through. Do not threaten legal action if you do not plan on going through with it. I made that mistake with the paintball client. I threatened legal action. He told me to go ahead, take him to court, and then I found out that it really wasn't worth it. Now, that's something I never should have done. And it actually made me look bad because I wasn't willing to follow through on my threat. So never threaten legal action if you don't plan on going through with it. Now, oftentimes, the mere mention of legal action is enough for a client to somehow miraculously find enough money to pay your invoice. If that doesn't work and the amount isn't too big, you can take the client to small claims court. That's a lot easier than actually getting a lawyer involved and filing a legal claim or action against them. Now, small claims court will require you to take time away from your business. So again, you have to weigh this option against the amount owed and decide if it's worth it. If the client owes you several $1,000s, then yes, it's worth it. But if they owe you a few $100s, it might not be. You have to weigh it for yourself. Now, if you're going after a larger sum, a letter from an attorney may be all you need. The thought of litigation is not something to take lightly, and most clients will want to avoid it when at all possible. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if you do go after a large client in this way, they may actually have an attorney on staff or one on retainer, and they may be willing to just let the attorneys battle it out, which can take a long time and possibly cost you a lot in the long run. So talk it out with your accountant, with your lawyer, and find out if this is an option. But legal action is the last resort. But if you're lucky, your situation will never escalate to the point where a lawyer needs to get involved. Your best option is actually just to communicate clearly with the client and work out a satisfactory solution for both of you. And if in the long run, for one reason or another, you never do receive payment that's owed to you, try not to stress too much about it. Your time is better spent working with your existing paying clients and trying to land new clients than it is fretting over the ones that didn't pay you. No matter what sum is owed, it's only money. You'll make more of it. And one day, you'll look back and realize that, what you thought was a really big deal isn't as big a deal as you made it out to be. So if you find yourself in a situation where clients are just not paying you for one reason or another, and it's a situation that you're not familiar with, you're not sure what to do, don't be afraid to ask people for advice. Many people, including many designers, have been through similar situations, and they're more than willing to help you by offering advice. So if you're not sure what to do, just ask. And please remember that clients are rarely being underhanded or petty. Most of the time, they don't pay your invoices because they simply forgot, or they just hadn't gotten around to it yet, or perhaps they needed to delay payment for some reason, but it's a valid reason. So communicate with them, talk to them, find out, and see what you can work out. It is extremely rare to have to go to the extremes that I've talked about in this podcast in order to collect money that's owed to you. But it is nice to know that should the need arise, there are options that you can use to collect the money from delinquent clients. Now, I would love to know, have you ever had to go after a client for a missed payment? Let me know. Leave a comment for this episode at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 256. Now, before I get to this week's tip of the week, I just want to share with you a little bit of what I've been up to. As always, I've always have podcast artwork to do, so I've got a few of those to do this week. A couple of them on the go, waiting for proofs to come back, whether they're approved or they want changes. I had a couple that did get approved. I also got a subscription to Ahrefs, and if you're not familiar with that, it's a platform that helps you monitor all sorts of metrics on websites. Backlinks and keywords that are ranking for and all sorts of stuff. It's really, really in-depth, a lot more in-depth than I ever heard of or imagined, I should say. I'd heard how great this program was, but now that I finally had a peek inside, wow, it's so much more in-depth than I thought it was. So I'm having a lot of fun playing with that. I got it because of a course I'm taking. I got a course on websites that I just was curious about, so I bought it and I'm going through it, and they talk a lot about Ahrefs, so I decided to give it a try, and I'm loving it so far. It's a great tool. But I spent a lot of time going through that course this week and put off most of the design work I had until next week. Luckily, I don't have anything with a pressing deadline, so I was able to do that, which is another benefit of working from home. Now, we had something really interesting happen in the Resourceful Designer community this past week. Mike, one of the community members, did a presentation for us on his brand strategy sessions and marketing roadmaps that he runs his clients through. This is a long process that he says often takes 8 to 10 hours that he does with his clients over a period of several days. And he went through step by step exactly what he does to help his clients. And this is actually a standalone product he does. It is that valuable that he sells this to his client, and then the client decides if they want to hire him afterwards, or they can take the information he gives them and go hire somebody else. But Mike was graceful enough to offer it to the community, showed us what he does and how he does it. And we had a great time. We had a lot of people watch that. And anybody who's a member of the Resourceful Designer community has all of these things recorded so you can watch them at your own leisure. So that's just one of the things happening within the community. Now, if you're interested in joining a community of great like-minded designers, people who are invested and want to grow and improve their business, then head on over to resourcefuldesigner.com/community and join today. So this week's tip is something that, I don't know, call it curse of knowledge. It's something I've known and I use all the time. And it's just one of those things that you forget that other people might not be familiar with this. And that is that if you build WordPress websites, you may or may not know that every time you upload an image to the WordPress media library, WordPress actually creates 3 additional copies of that image at different sizes. So you have the image that you upload, and then WordPress will create a large version, a medium version, and a thumbnail version of that image. So every image in your WordPress media library has 4 images associated to it. And that means that you're taking up extra server space that you may or may not need. And it also means that every time WordPress loads, it has to do a media query to find out which of these images it's going to display on the screen. Now, the reason WordPress does this is mostly for blog posts. So when you set your featured image, that featured image may be a big image at the top, but a lot of blog posts, there may be another page that lists all the blogs available, and that would have a smaller image. Maybe on another page, the thing will only show up as a thumbnail. So WordPress, instead of taking your large image and trying to shrink it down every time, will have different sizes images in order to accommodate these different uses. Well, if you're building a WordPress website that will not incorporate a blog, there's no reason to have WordPress create all these additional images. It just takes up storage space and it creates extra media queries. And this is a really easy thing to take care of. In fact, you can do it in less than a minute. Whenever you're in the backend of WordPress, you just navigate to Settings and then go to Media. And in there, you'll see a thing called Media Settings. And it says image sizes, and then you got thumbnail size, medium size, and large size. Now, these allow you to pick whatever sizes you want. Do you want your large image, your media image, and your thumbnails to be a certain size? So it's great for that purpose. But if you're not planning on using a blog, there's no sense having these different image sizes. So what you can do is set all of these to 0. If you set them to 0, like say the thumbnail or medium or large size, if you set them to 0, then WordPress will not generate an image for that size. And that means that every image you upload to WordPress only has the image you actually uploaded and not these additional ones. So that's a quick thing to do. If you're not going to have a blog, if you're just going to have a regular website with pages and no actual blog involved with it, why not stop all these additional images that are just going to take up server space and create extra media queries, which means it could slow down the website because of all the media queries. So just eliminate all of that by eliminating these redundant image sizes. Set them all to 0. So that's this week's tip of the week. And if you're a WordPress user, I hope I just taught you something. Anyways, that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Let me know by leaving a message at feedback@resourcefuldesigner.com. Until next time, I am Mark Decote, wishing you all the best with your design business and reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer Podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.